Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining. So a couple of important reminders before we start. If you go to the next slide, please, Henry. This is an open meeting under the Linux Foundation LFH, so we ask all attendees to please adhere to applicable antitrust laws. And second, please be aware that this meeting is going to be recorded. We will post the recording in the HX Foundry website, and I'll share that link in the chat window for everyone's reference. Next slide, Henry. Okay, so again, good morning. Thank you for joining everyone to today's session of the HX Foundry Adopter Series. I would also like to thank the HX Outreach and Marketing teams for promoting this event. And my name is Camilo Dennis from Intel. I am the HX Foundry Marketing Chair and the Vertical Solutions Working Group Co-Chair. And this morning, I have the pleasure to introduce you to a great speaker lineup and to help moderate questions. All attendees are currently muted, so if you want to ask a question, please type it in the Q&A chat window or request to be unmuted. Today's agenda is the introduction to the Open Retail Reference Architecture, or ORA, which is a new retail subproject under HX Foundry's Vertical Solutions Working Group. I would like also to thank today's speakers from HP, IBM, and Intel. We have Henry Lowe from HP. Henry is my fellow HX Vertical Solutions Working Group co-chair and HP's representative to the LFH Technical Advisory Committee. Henry is a distinguished technologist with the retail and industry team at HP and the software architecture lead for HP's Retail Edge and Retail Android products. Our second speaker is from IBM, Joe Pearson. Joe is a technology strategist for IBM's Edge Computing CTO group. He is IBM's representative to the LFH Technical Advisory Committee and chair of the Open Horizon project within LFH. Last but not least, Chris Timmins from Intel. Chris is the Director of Partnerships and Alliances for the IoT Emerging Technologies Group at Intel. I am part of Chris's team, and today's presentation is a good example of what our team does, which is to collaborate with partners to drive and accelerate scalable IoT deployments. We do this across industry verticals, including retail. Our team also leads the Open Retail Initiative, from which many partners are attending today's session. And as you know, the Open Retail Initiative main goal is to drive technology collaboration in retail, leveraging open source ingredients. So that's a good segue for today's presentation, and I will leave you with Chris, Joe, and Henry.
Thank you. This is Joe Pearson. We're here to talk about store transformation at the edge and open retail reference architecture. As a bit of a background, we are at a unique place in time and history where a growing trend and a major societal shift are converging with mutual reinforcing feedback. The trend I'm talking about is edge computing, and the societal shift is the massive change in our behaviors due to the pandemic and government, business, and personal responses to it. Henry, you can go back one slide still. Expectations for edge computing are very much on the rise in the hype cycle. Still in the technology trigger section, if you're familiar with what that graph normally looks like. We've not yet reached the peak of inflated expectations, but we should be close. We are nowhere near disillusionment nor enlightenment and productivity. The changes in society are kind of like tectonic plates, where you have constant friction from rubbing that normally prevents major changes from happening quickly everywhere and all at once. So when an earthquake happens, this friction is momentarily overcome, and large transformations suddenly move from the realm of the impossible to the theoretical, to the possible, to the likely. So this unique situation that we're in with edge computing and the pandemic means that retailers and retail vendors have both a mandate and an opportunity to transform stores and the shopping experience while inertia has been temporarily overcome. Next slide. So the three founders of the Open Retail Reference Architecture, HP Inc., Intel, and IBM, share a common set of beliefs. And these are guiding the initial tools that we have chosen and the direction that we'd like to go. But this isn't about our three companies. It's about creating a community of stakeholders, people, and groups with skin in the game. And the goal here is to jointly arrive at a shared set of open technologies, meaning standards and tools, through consensus. So in other words, we are asking you to become us as we shape these principles and build the technologies. We believe retailers want to make better decisions more quickly. That means gaining a competitive advantage by getting inside the OODA loop. That's observe, orient, decide, and act. The key to accomplishing this will be for stores to make decisions with autonomy and as close to the data source as practical. Second point there, with thin profit margins, retailers are always looking for ways to trim expenses. This implies avoiding being locked into proprietary solutions and enabling both reuse and repurposing of existing infrastructure as much as sensible. So when that coincides with application modernization, so much the better. The third point there, retailers have to comply with privacy regulations, which may vary by jurisdictions from local to global, while at the same time providing a personalized experience to shoppers across all channels. So this introduces some tough challenges that require distributed information, intelligence, and decision-making capabilities. Fourth point there, retailers should not lose capabilities in the store due to network outages or excessive network latencies. By employing edge-native best practices supported by Aura Platform Services, store-based services should be capable of continuous operation. And the last point there, retailers would like to be able to reconfigure distributed systems as needed, deploy new workloads to repurpose existing infrastructure. And by the way, when I say workloads, I'm implying applications, services, machine learning assets, and so on. And last, they want to onboard new devices without a truck roll. Retailers would also like to be able to support new channels with minimal lead time. So if you disagree with any of these statements here, please let us know. And likewise, if you think we've left out something important, please give us that feedback. If necessary, I'd recommend jotting down a note real quick so you don't lose your thought as we go along, so you can give us that feedback. We'd really appreciate that. Next slide, please, Henry. Here are some public quotes from large retailers that we've chosen because we believe these quotes reinforce the points we just made. Go ahead and read these. I'll pause for a second. Okay, the first quote there acknowledges you cannot run a successful store without periodically modernizing your infrastructure. Given the rate of advances in hardware and software, a set of regular scheduled upgrades will both decrease operating expenses while providing more flexibility and compatibility between systems and allow for future proofing. The second quote there speaks to the value provided by that equipment, which should always have a primary or secondary aim of improving the customer's experience. So one big takeaway from this is we want Aura to have a large representation from both retailers and vendors. The Aura project should not be driven primarily or exclusively by hyperscalers and solution providers. So if Aura doesn't listen to retailers and customers from the very outset, we failed. Next slide. So this is a bit of an eye chart. Let's go through this. The existing infrastructure and software architectures currently present some real barriers to the goals that retailers must achieve, and we'd call those imperatives. On the right-hand side, these architecture barriers must be addressed, and the business needs aren't going away, they're only accelerating. That's why eliminating these barriers have become imperatives. So let's dig into them real quick. First one there, the different systems and processes in a store may not be connected with each other, or data is only reconciled in the cloud through periodic scheduled updates. Aura would like to make it possible to integrate systems with each other by promoting shared standards. This is one area that EdgeX Foundry has already pioneered with the real-time sensor fusion demo. Once you make it possible for different devices to share data and to process that data locally, you enable new classes of functionality. Which brings us to the barrier of disconnected data. We already have so many devices generating data, we cannot send all of it to the cloud to be processed. It's both cost prohibitive and time consuming for unknown benefits. But the current response, which is either ignoring or throwing away that data, prevents decision makers from seeing the whole picture. So we have to be able to pre-process that data locally and identify deviations from the norm, as well as providing real-time reports. EdgeX Foundry provides a great platform for running these analytics. Third point there, monolithic applications are also a very big barrier. They require more compute and they limit process reuse, as well as potentially locking physical stores into aging hardware solutions. You need to be able to enable potentially gradual application modernization as slowly or quickly as needed to edge native applications. So Open Horizon can assist with the deployment and application lifecycle management for these applications. And the last architectural barrier there, deploying new infrastructure to thousands of locations can be a real barrier, as it traditionally requires distributed training and truck rolls to all locations. Secure Device Onboard, or SDO, can prevent that by separating the simple installation of hardware from the device onboarding process and fully automating the latter with zero-touch solution based on open standards. So by addressing these four architectural barriers, Aura will allow retailers to more easily achieve their business imperatives. So on the left there, reducing the cost of hardware, energy usage, bandwidth, application development, while at the same time unlocking new capabilities through open standard support, increased system and process integration, and new data solutions. Second point there, providing potentially unexpected value to customers through new capabilities. For example, notifying them that an item they're interested in purchasing is about to be sold out based on the current rate of purchase, or letting them know if an item they usually purchase is about to go on sale and asking them if they'd like to add it to their cart or have it delivered to their home right away. The third point there is about allowing stores to add new channels as needed or demanded and modifying them to improve their effectiveness and profitability. And the last point, it's important that we allow innovative ideas to be quickly implemented at any scale, meaning in a single location, over a whole region, or even nationwide. Next slide. So we've shown you the architectural barriers that prevent retailers from meeting their business imperatives, but solving this is not as simple as hiring a team of developers to integrate your current applications and solutions. So to do it the right way, what you need is to be able to create a seamless, interoperable platform tailored to your business needs. And that means creating a cohesive platform. So how do you create workloads, applications, reusable services, and machine learning assets, and distribute them to different locations in all environments? Let's look at that white foundational line at the bottom of the diagram. This is only possible if you not only use cloud native development best practices, but if you also build for the edge, meaning edge native development best practices. This will allow your team to write once and deploy anywhere. On top of that, you build or purchase or use application services that support open APIs. That open ecosystem is very important. Above that, you need to integrate them using loosely coupled event-driven reference architectures based on open technology. Tying it all together, the data plane there, you need to respect data sovereignty and privacy issues by storing and processing the data locally and federating queries when you don't send the data northbound. This may require more normalized schemas to aid in training and retraining models when you want to inject intelligence into the analytics. And last there at the top of the rainbow, you need a standard extensible UI to allow people to administer all of the solutions in the platform, ideally from a single place. To make this happen, it's critical that we, meaning the community around Aura, utilize Aura as a forum for discussing our needs and use that to feed into this. Next slide, please. So as I wrap up this section, I want to stress we're trying to accomplish two contradictory goals simultaneously. We're attempting to add and anticipate new systems and functionality, which adds more complexity, while at the same time, we're trying to simplify management and administration of those systems. So here on this slide, take a close look at this. We're showing you 5 top priorities for retail modernization that we've heard from people. Please give us some feedback and help us to improve this. But starting at the top, moving clockwise, personalized transactions and service, smart signage and digital services, better flexible employee tools, AI-infused insights derived from connected devices, and optimized inventory management. So now that I've described the challenges and barriers that retailers face and how we should overcome those, I'll turn it over to Chris Timmons to remind us about the promise of edge computing and why we feel that an open retail reference architecture will get us to the open retail ecosystem that we need.
Excellent. Thanks, Joe. Henry,
Sure.
I think you can pop forward one more. So fundamental. Oh, sorry, go back one, Henry. I think we skipped over one there. There we go. So when we think of edge computing, we really think of placing enterprise applications very close to where the data is actually created. So kind of, co-locating those things and making sure that as you kind of, chop the data up, that there are parts of it that need to go back to the cloud. There are parts that may need to go to the regional telco edge, or parts that stay local that are probably never going to leave the premises, especially when we think of video data where there's lots of applicable privacy laws. They vary widely by geography, not only by state within the US, but as you think of enterprises that work across the US and Europe and on through big multinationals through Asia and into China. There's a wide variety of rules here, and you need a kind of a mindset that will allow you to be adaptive to those. If you'll go forward one more, Henry. So open retail reference architecture, what is it? So it's a common application development platform for edge-based retail solutions and IoT devices. But what we really want to do is it's not an Intel-driven effort, it's not an IBM-driven effort, an HPI-driven effort. This is really a community-driven effort. And we want to bring those cloud-native development practices that have allowed the cloud to reach hyperscale down to the edge type environments. And we also want to look at how do you build that kind of seamless environment from the data center edge to the telco edge, all the way down to where the physical meets the digital within the 4 walls of the store. And all of this needs to be built on tooling that is basically the same as what we've seen in the cloud, again, that has allowed scale, but allows developers to kind of have the same access to the edge as well. So why Aura? Well, Aura is really, it's a collaborative effort between tech leaders who have that same mindset. We believe in open accessible solutions, and we believe that there is acceleration for adoption of technology within the retail environments when you adopt that mindset. And we've also heavily aligned it with the existing Linux Foundation projects. So EdgeX Foundry for the middleware, Open Horizon for the application management, secure device onboarding for provisioning, and also our Open Retail initiative, which has brought close to 80 plus partners into the fold already. So we're really aligning all of our open source efforts between our 3 companies into open retail reference architecture, or what we commonly call Aura. Next slide, Henry. So we were for certain that every presentation would be lacking unless we had some type of architectural diagram on made in PowerPoint. But this is really just a high level look at kind of our initial thoughts. And what you can see is really a distributed way to get IoT at the edge. So if we start from the left, you can think of, we've just represented a few things that we would think of as IoT sensors. And those are also can be seen as some type of edge device. So you might need some of the applications running there. They're running very low in the on the southbound side, and they have some type of platform services running on them, but not every device would need platform services. And then as you pull that back, you're moving up to what would be much more of like a micro cloud or hybrid cloud kind of at the edge where you're doing consolidation of those. You can see here, there would be containers, there'd be virtual machines, there could be a consolidated base for applications to land, and then you have a way to kind of lifecycle manage those applications like you would in the cloud. And then you also have on the bottom part, the arrows on the bottom, you also see the control and kind of provisioning thing of, hey, how are we actually looking at the underlying hardware as well? And all of that connecting back to the cloud. So it really is a distributed view of things. It's really how do we create a system whereby the APIs within the store and the APIs in the cloud are very similar. It doesn't require you to actually, code against two completely different things, that there's a much more seamless experience. And it's all done on the backbone of open source. Henry, if you'll flip one more forward. So key drivers for edge computing in store. I don't think I'm going to tell anybody anything that we don't already know, but we wanted to make sure that we were all aligned. One, you have a lot of ephemeral data that's created at the edge, and that is data that probably is never going to be transferred to the cloud. It's most likely never going to leave the store. You can think of, very quick interactions that happen at checkout. You could send every single coupon back to the cloud, but latency would probably say that you deliver a fairly poor customer experience for that. You could process a lot of that locally. The same thing as I mentioned earlier with video data, which is a lot of that you're never going to want to send to the cloud. One, it's not relevant for the enterprise as a whole. It consumes a tremendous amount of bandwidth. You have to pre-process a lot of it, and you may violate privacy regulations. The next one is latency. There's a lot of operating applications with what we would call real-time, retail real-time, so not what you would think of in industrial, that in the cloud are probably not possible with the state of connectivity today and the high variability of connectivity across enterprises. You also have issues with security and confidentiality, applications that require particularly high protection level to protect collected data from unauthorized access and falsification. How much of that do you want to process at the edge versus moving it back and forth between the edge and cloud? And lastly is, the low cost of entry and platform maturity. We want to start converging infrastructure at the edge, make it look significantly more cloud-like, and then we want to be pre-positioned to take high advantage of as high bandwidth connectivity from SD-WAN and from 5G come online to actually allow an even broader split between what's going to the cloud and what's staying on the edge. I think one more, Henry. Oh, well, that's actually my section, and I'll turn it over to Henry Lau.
Hi, yeah. So we are gonna, quickly just give a brief overview of the 3 open source project we would base Aura on, right? The first one is EdgeX Foundry. So, as we are doing this presentation as part of the EdgeX Adopter Series, so I would expect many people on the call is familiar with EdgeX. This is a project that's been around for almost 4 years now, with consistently creating a new version and updates every 6 months. This is the middleware framework to provide interoperability between IoT devices and applications at the on-premise edge. It allows us, as mentioned earlier, it allows us to process data closer to where it is generated, be able to provide edge insights and actuations where it is needed. And then further on, the module can connect to other backend systems. And this EdgeX is not, obviously middleware, not limited to just retail. We have many users using it to address other industries such as oil and gas, manufacturing, automation, etc. The second one is the Open Horizon project. This was started by IBM and introduced to the LF Edge group last year. This is the Edge application management platform to deploy, maintain, and scale business logic applications on edge devices. Allows you to create policies, offline operations, multi-tenancy, and many other features. So the first one is the middleware. This second one is the application management layer. Then the third one is secure device onboarding. This was a project started by Intel and joined the LFedge group also last year. This covers the need for automated onboarding and provisioning of edge devices. There will be many edge devices, and you want to be able to do that accurately and repeatedly on configuring these devices, and also reducing the number of truck rolls you have to do to handle them. The intent is to reduce labor costs, accelerate provisioning time, and accuracy. So back to Joe.
Thank you, Henry. So here on this slide, don't read it too closely. I think many of us are already familiar with a lot of the use cases out there, both in retail and where retail intersects with edge computing. But something very, very important to keep in mind as you look at this is the purpose of Aura itself is not to build any of these use cases. Instead, the whole point is to actually enable them. Henry, if you could jump back to slide 12 real quick. There's something I want to illustrate between the use cases and Aura itself.
Hang on 1 second.
Just threw a monkey wrench into the works here.
This one?
There we go. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so focus on the green boxes that you see there. This is really the meat and potatoes of what we are talking about when we talk about something that Aura will build and help deliver, these green boxes. So if every vendor wanted to approach Aura with their own specific prerequisites, then what we would end up with is essentially a very large monolithic application that adds cost and complexity to a hypothetical set of services. That's not something anyone wants or would actually use. What we are hoping to do with the Aura project here is to identify the common denominators between all of the different vendors and between the different use cases. What do they share in common? And once we've identified those, we can build those into Aura. That would become Aura Platform Services, so that what the vendors can actually do is eliminate their basic overhead. So they no longer need to focus on these particular common elements. This frees up the vendors to focus on their distinctives, their intellectual property, their strategic differentiators. So I'll repeat that real quick. What we're trying to do here is identify the common denominators between all of the vendors and build those into Aura so that vendors can eliminate their basic overhead for these common elements. This frees them up to focus on their distinctives, their intellectual property, and their strategic differentiators. So we can go back to where I was, Henry, in the slide deck. So basically, by approaching Aura this way, it will also ensure maximum possible compatibility between all the vendor solutions as we begin to tackle use cases like these here. So next slide. So in summary, today we showed you retailers are in a unique situation where their freedom to implement transformation is at its peak and the barriers to change are at their lowest. Accelerating business needs are making the removal of architectural barriers an imperative. And we need stakeholders, meaning retailers and vendors, to join Aura, to validate our beliefs or improve them, while we together define and deliver the reference architecture that will increase value for stores going forward. So please visit our wiki page. You can see the URL there. Although that's probably too long to remember, we'll need to paste it into the chat there. So please visit that wiki page. There you'll find information about upcoming public meetings, our mailing list, and Slack channels, where everyone who volunteers to work with us will help create the organization that makes this vision a reality. So thank you for listening to us. It's time for us to listen to you. What questions and comments do you have for us? So I guess with that, we'll open it up to questions. Thanks, Camilla, for posting that.
Thank you, Joe, Chris, and Henry. So as everyone knows, if you want to talk, there's a button there that says allow to talk, or post your question in the Q&A functionality that you have at the bottom of your screen.
And while we're waiting for the questions to be typed in, there was one important point to mention, and that is Aura itself is very young, very new. We're still putting things together. And as such, I want to make sure you don't come away with a mistaken impression that there's already code that exists in a GitHub repository that you can clone and install and start using. We're still in the very beginning stages here of building up the organization. As you'll see, if you go to the wiki page on the left, there's a link to our governance document. This is our first pass at putting together what we believe is the structure that will work best for Aura. But we haven't even started having our public meetings yet. So we are at the very beginning of this process.
And Joe, there's a question in the chat. Have any major retailers asked for Aura solutions? So I think the answer is early, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's the question.
I think one thing we could say, Camilo, is, and we can't name names, but if you're out active in the industry, we already know of at least 2 significant retailers in the U.S. that I wouldn't say they've asked for them, because they've actually built them by themselves. So they're actually actively going down this path, and they're doing it on their own. Now, those are very large retailers with large development organizations. So if we see the movement on the front end, and you think of that as kind of the early adopter, or the kind of pioneers of it, then we see that happening already. And I think, as Tim Huckabee mentioned in his question, you start to see some of this coming from the major cloud vendors. So obviously, there's nothing wrong with working with all the major cloud vendors. There's tracks of work that AWS has in this, Microsoft has in this as well. We're just providing a different channel by which to do it. And I think, Tim, your other question around, EdgeX did not. So I think Aura is much more than just EdgeX. So EdgeX is one piece of the puzzle, but I think we know from experience, and potentially where you're kind of picking out a little bit, is EdgeX may solve one part of the puzzle, but it's not a complete solution for everything that you need to deliver a full reference architecture from edge to cloud, or cloud to edge from wherever you sit. So I think we're aware of that. And as we start to move these projects together and bring them all together, I think you'll see acceleration in that. I don't know, Joe or Henry, if you guys have thoughts as well.
One point I wanted to make is that Secure Device Onboard, for example, is a reference implementation of the FIDO IoT spec. And interestingly enough, Microsoft and I think AWS and Google are also members of the FIDO IoT organization. So this is actually an attempt to work together with all of them to come up with an open standard. And this is the type of engagement I would like to see happen at other interfaces that intersect retail.
Yeah, another comment I would add in there is, based on what Chris Timmons says, right? Yeah, there are many large retailers that we all look towards that we all wanted to do business with them. But the large retailers have their own large development teams and IT teams to handle this. But we still cannot forget there's another next tier of smaller retailers that might not have the ability to develop everything themselves, and they look to system integrators and ISVs to help them modernize their operations and build the systems. And for those people, for those vendors, right, they want to focus on the expertise of being maybe the asset management company, or maybe the theft detection company. but they don't necessarily want to have to invent or create or build a base platform and have to maintain that themselves. And I see Aura as filling a very strategic needs to build the base platform, and then, like Joe mentioned earlier in the talk, then each of these vendors can then focus their energy on their expertise, on their differentiations, and not have to worry about maintaining the base platforms. And then you can even have the same platform addressing multiple needs going forward. You don't have to keep rebuilding new ones every time for a new use case.
Great. And we also had 2 questions typed into the Q&A panel there. First one from Abhishek said, when we look at the reference architecture and the physical constraints that we have in the stores, how do you see AI-related use cases evolve at the edge with heavy GPU requirements? So did anyone want to take a whack at that, or I can take a whack at that?
I say go for it, Joe.
Okay. So yes, first of all, I have seen a lot of use cases in stores that do require GPUs. For example, a lot of COVID use cases do visual inferencing. And for those, we've actually seen a lot of vendors selling hardware that includes a smart camera that has a GPU built into it, as well as the ability to run containerized applications. So what we focused on for a lot of those is for the smart camera, you try to do the inferencing on the camera itself. For, I guess, a dumb camera, what you would do is essentially stream the video to another location where there might be a shared GPU you could leverage, ideally still within the store. So that is one aspect of this. Another aspect is what we're seeing is a lot of machine learning applications being able to leverage smaller and more constrained hardware. So for example, you have a lot of dedicated microcontrollers that have GPU-like capabilities, where if you can deploy a small enough neural network model to those devices, you can actually perform basic AI quite well directly on a very constrained device. So I'm seeing the 2 different movements there. I think Aura plans to support both types of capabilities, both the extremely constrained AI inferencing, as well as your beefier GPUs. And there were 4 more questions on the Q&A panel there. First question, foundational elements. And by the way, this is a question we've actually heard 3 or 4 times, but it's important for everyone to hear the answer. The foundational elements for most edge deployments are similar. So why are we focused only on the retail vertical? Chris or Henry, did you want to take that?
Well, everybody needs a place to start, right? So I think we were all very familiar with retail, but I would say that nothing that we're talking about building under open retail reference architecture would not be portable to other verticals. So I think we would look at this as definitely deliverable to a vertical, but much more of a horizontal capability.
Yeah, same thing along with that, right? I think part of the reason why many things start with retail is because of the familiarity with the retail, because all of us are consumers in this space. So we interact with retails every single day, to restaurants, to stores, or other transactions, etc. So that's most familiar with everyone, and that seems to be the largest market, right? Versus other verticals like oil and gas, for example, that's like a specific segment of it. But certainly all these components would apply. Like Chris said, we have to start somewhere. We start with an area that seems to have the largest pool and have most familiarity, and obviously what we put together can apply to many other users.
Well, I think that's Henry. You hit on a good point there. I want to make sure that when people hear the word retail here, that we don't just mean big box retail or specialty, soft goods, hard goods. What we're really talking about retail is with a very broad brush. So that could encompass quick serve restaurants, the hospitality industry. So there would be travel stuff in here, as well as all of the very traditional retail type environments. So we should make sure that people understand that's a very broad brush. I think one of the other drivers behind that is, with COVID, there's so much fundamental change going in retail right now. The disruption is kind of staggering, and the move to the cloud and the move to, the digitization of retail is really opportunity laden for all of us.
Thanks. The second question he had was, what is the license for this? That's a pretty easy one to answer. EdgeX Foundry is part of LF Edge. And LF Edge has a list of open source licenses that are applicable normally. In the case of both EdgeX Foundry and SDO and Open Horizon, for our code today, we use the Apache 2.0 license. For our documentation, we use the CC by 4.0 license. Both of those are incredibly permissive while still allowing contributors to maintain their copyright over documentation, as well as their intellectual property that the software may implement. So I anticipate we will follow the LF Edge lead. Most likely for a lot of these use either those specific licenses or similar. Third question, are there plans for interoperability between cloud and edge offerings? So absolutely. Speaking for myself here, one of our goals here is to make sure that we support all public clouds as well as private clouds. And when it comes to edge platforms as well, our goal here is to create the standards necessary to make it easier to support all of them, if that makes sense. So today, to support all of the clouds, there's no one single standard necessarily. So we have to rely on other software and other solutions as a go-between. When it comes to edge computing, we hope to prevent that by helping to seed edge computing solutions with the necessary standards, so we don't have to repeat that same mistake. Henry or Chris, did you want to say anything else to that point?
Yeah, I think Rohit added more comments on this particular question in the Q&A. He says, what I meant is edge strategy is much like the early age OS choice we have to make for end deployment and the risk of getting stuck to one OS in older times. So I imagine what he implies is, we don't want to stuck with one particular cloud infrastructure, right? And this is not. This is, for example, EdgeX has a northbound export service to allow you to configure to connect to pretty much any type of cloud or server type, components that you have, right? We are not, controlling that or mandating that. That's the difference, right? This is an open source project. This is not a product that a particular company has. So, it's up to you with your service offering or with the company that you are working with to whether you want to put together a solution based on this reference architecture to put together a specific solution to address a specific need or use case. That's all up to you, right? We are just a reference platform as a part of an open source project.
Yeah, I think it's very much all about choice, Henry. So to Rohit's question, if you chose to just go with one partner, right, that would be fine with us. If you chose to go with multiple partners, that would be fine as well. But we believe that choice should reside with the end user.
Thanks, guys. One other point I think it's very important for us to stress. We are not in the business of picking winners. We're not in the business of picking one particular vendor or one particular solution and saying everyone needs to go with this. Instead, we're trying to define what the interfaces are where you plug different solutions together and saying this is the open standard. And as long as any solution complies with that, you should be able to, in theory, plug and place various solutions, your preferred solutions, into these. So if you don't want to use one solution and you want to use the other, as long as they support the standards, please go right ahead.
And I think there's one more final question in the Q&A, right? Is what are the planned other areas other than the three mentioned projects?
Can you expand on that real quick? Yeah.
Maybe you can touch on the Akraino blueprint. I don't know if that's a, other than the three mentioned, meaning Open Horizon,
EdgeX and
SDO and EdgeX.
SDO, yeah, that was. I think the basic answer is right. We're not limiting to those, but those three components is what we started with, as it give us essentially the middleware framework, the edge application management, and the provisioning. And we'll have to look at what other problems needs to be solved to start gluing pieces together.
And if anybody on the call has ideas for what other projects would be good, just share them with us.
And a new question just came in from Bart. Curious if the on-premise hardware underpinning the delivery of these is scalable. So core or lower up through Xeon. Ah, okay.
We can translate that into the non-Intel speak. So how about low power to high power?
Sure. Yeah, so when you look at Edge, LF Edge itself has a really nice diagram that talks about the different types of edges that are out there. One is typically the network edge, if you will, where you think about very large, beefy hardware running large clusters. So there is certainly that aspect to this. Second would be the near the on-premise edge on either side of the last mile. And when you think about that, you're thinking about server and gateway class machines very much. Yeah, there we go. So this is helpful. So you have the big beefy Xeon type. You have the server and gateway type that could be x86, it could be ARM chips or others. And then lastly, you have the devices themselves, which have a very, very wide range of architectures. And I think our goal here is to be able to support all of those.
Yeah, I think you might also see in that edge server cluster a variety of accelerators as well, right? So you can see
Good
GPU,
point.
DPU, FPGAs as well being shared resources.
Great. Any other questions people may have?
Besides questions, what are people's thoughts also, if you want to share at this point? Is this interesting, not interesting? And any suggestions on areas to address or directions? Yeah, we are all ears. And if you don't want to talk about it now, you can certainly reach out to any of us afterwards.
Excellent. And pay attention to the wiki page. I hope to have information posted there soon about when we will begin having our first public meetings.
Okay, let's poll for any last question. And if not, we will give 9 minutes back to everyone. And thank you for today's presenters, and thank you for all the attendees for joining. As mentioned at the beginning of the meetings, we will be posting this recording in the EdgeX Foundry website.
Thanks.
Thanks everyone for attending, and thanks everyone for participating.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.